What is up, everybody, and welcome to the first of hopefully at least a few episodes of the Aftermath series, where we take a look at an update that's happened in the past after the dust has settled and the hype has died down to see how the update actually affected the game. In today's episode, we're going to talk about Amethyst, and I know it's a mining update and it's not very exciting. I mentioned this idea to someone recently and they said as long as I throw a few jokes in and make it entertaining, it'll be a good video. But when talking about mining, I couldn't think of any better joke than the skill itself, so I decided to keep it pretty simple. So with that being said, let's get started into our brief analysis of the Amethyst update. On June 22nd, an expansion to the mining guild was introduced into the game. This expansion consisted of several convenient mid to high tier ores, some new items, an invisible mining level boost while you're inside of the guild, and it brought along with itself a brand new mineral, Amethyst. When this was released, I made some statements in a previous video on where I thought Amethyst would sit within the RuneScape meta, and now we're back to analyze how this update ended up doing. The reason I think this is an update worth talking about is, in my opinion, it's a rather unique update. It's a high-level skilling update that touched a few areas of the game, and when it was implemented, I just had questions on how it would sit within the game based on the information given and the rates at which you obtain this mineral. So personally, I went back and reviewed the data, and when I looked at it, I thought it might be interesting to make a video out of it, so that's why I think it's worth talking about. So getting into the analysis, I want to treat this kind of as my thought process going through what I did when I tried to find out where Amethyst really sits. Now you can go and just look at the GP and look at the rates that you mine it and come up with the GP per hour and XP per hour rates, but that's not really what my goal was. My goal was to determine why it is where it is. So we kind of have to start at the mineral itself. The metric I'm going to base a lot of my assumptions off of is the amount of times that this item was bought or sold. I know it's not a perfect metric, but I think since this is a gathering skill, it's a good way to kind of gauge what the supply and demand is and also how much of it is coming into the game. Since the main purpose of this item is to be turned into range equipment, there's really no other use, so a lot of the items that come into the game will be directly put into that, so I think it's the closest we can get to an accurate metric. So if we take a look at rsbuddy/exchange and look up Amethyst, about 45,000 have been bought or sold per day over the last few weeks. While that may not seem like a lot, it does keep in line with other gem rates such as opal or red topaz, so it wasn't that shocking. But what I really wanted to find out is where the Amethyst was going. The next thing we need to look at is the direct byproducts of Amethyst, so bolt tips, javelin heads, and arrow tips. And I think these are still relatively accurate if we look at the amount bought or sold, because these don't trade hands often. And by that I mean if you look at just arrows in general. So if we looked at Amethyst arrows, those trade hands a lot because there's multiple uses. There's only one use for arrow tips, which is to make the arrows. So unless someone's merching them, there's really no reason to keep buying and selling them. So I think it's at least a relatively accurate, or as close as we can get to accurate, of a metric to use. So if we look at the amount of items bought or sold for those three categories, bolt tips, javelin heads, and arrowheads, or arrow tips, 63% of the Amethyst looks like it's going into arrow tips. The reason arrow tips are probably the most common out of these three is just due to bows being a very common mid-level hybrid range switch for PvP, and getting the extra max hit that Amethyst arrows offers is valuable in PvP, and javelins and bolts are just not as common in that mid tier. So seeing arrow tips as the main contributing factor to the demand of Amethyst is not surprising, but at least to me what is surprising is how much of an impact it had. So looking at recent numbers, we can see that over 1 million Amethyst arrows are traded, either bought or sold, per day. And that's a pretty big number considering that rune arrows, which would have been the next best in slot after Amethyst for that mid-tier PvP, is only around 11 to 12 million trades per day. And those have more uses than Amethyst, given their price. They're a cheaper price, and there's a lot of other ways to get rune arrows compared to just mining and crafting them like with Amethyst. Nothing drops Amethyst, so given its high level requirement and the fact that nothing drops it, Amethyst arrows being traded 10% as much as rune arrows is saying something. And I think this is kind of what I missed in my original video, is just underestimating the PvP scene, or at least the size of it. I speculated that Amethyst would sit a little bit above its ALK price, which would be around 3,500, but it's currently sitting at almost 4,100 GP. And while it may be obvious to say that demand is fueled by the PvP scene, or at least the Amethyst arrow scene, I think it is worth stating that these arrows have such an impact on the price of Amethyst as a whole. So now that we've looked at where the demand from Amethyst is coming from and what makes it keep its price, we can look at XP rates and GP rates. So the XP rates were actually in the poll, and it was between 22,000 and 26,000 XP per hour, depending on your level. And at current average prices, that puts your GP amount between 375 and 425k per hour, which it's not great, but if you look at other similar AFK methods at that level tier, it actually makes sense. Let's look at Redwoods, for example. It has a level 90 requirement, gives you around 60,000 experience per hour, but the money just isn't there. So if we're going to compare that to Amethyst, you have the trade-off of less XP per hour, but you're getting quite a bit more GP, which I think makes sense. So I would say that this does have a spot in the game, and it's not either dead content, and I don't think it will be. I don't think there will be an overabundance of Amethyst that will flood the market just due to the high level requirement. But I also don't think the market will starve based on the relatively high GP per hour for being completely or almost completely AFK. So while I may not think that this is a game-changing update, I do have to take back what I said. This does have a spot in the meta, and I don't think it's either dead content or overpowered, because once the dust settled and the price stabilized, there does seem to be a decent balance between the amount you can AFK it, the GP you get per hour, and the XP. So that is all I have for our analysis of the Amethyst update. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know it was something that interested me because I did have kind of confusion on when it was released, on where it would stand in the game and if it would even have a spot. And it turns out after everything is all said and done, it does have a spot. Whether or not it's an incredibly useful spot, it is a spot. So if you do want to see any more of this similar style of video for any update, let me know. I do have a few more planned that will hopefully be a little bit more exciting than mining, but hey, at least it can't get any more boring than this. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.